And that's a life-size Psyduck. It's all I wanted, so I'm feeling pretty good. But anyway, welcome to Obscure Power, the YouTube series where I show you guys some underplayed, undervalued, and extremely powerful Magic cards that you could possibly introduce to your playgroup and be the guy that introduces all these new cards to your friends, or beats their ass with them, whichever. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, drop a like, subscribe, comment, do all that stuff. Be sure to join the Discord and check out the Patreon if you want to show some additional support. And with that, let's get into the list. Up first, Radiant Solar. Now, I know that that's Radiant. I'm gonna say Radiant so I can make a short out of this and get a lot of comments on it. Anyway, Radiant Solar is 5 and a white for a 3/6 with flying and lifelink. Whenever Radiant Solar or another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, venture into the dungeon, pay 1 white, discard Radiant Solar, venture into the dungeon, and you gain 3 life. This is actually really good, and yes, I'm probably going to put it into net because it's a big flying lifelink beater that I can put in the graveyard just with its own ability, which is, you know, in a Reanimator deck. That's real good. But on top of that, every time I have a non-token enter, which in a Reanimator deck, I'm going to have tons of non-tokens enter, I get to venture into the dungeon. And with the dungeons having some pretty powerful effects towards the end, one of them being cheating creatures into play, yeah, in a Reanimator deck, I feel like this has a ton of use. And while we're on the subject of Reanimator, enter the dungeon, Sephiroth, obviously, I feel like this is pretty good in that deck as well. For the price, for the amount of decks, give it a try. Coming in at the blue slot on the list is Excavation. Excavation is 1 and a blue for an enchantment. Pay 1, sacrifice a land, draw a card. Any player may play this ability. I think this is just cool. If you're in a group hug deck, this is great because you're giving everyone at the table the opportunity to draw while also making them sack lands, which could be great. If you're in like a Bant Lands Matter deck, this could be a good way to get lands in your graveyard while also drawing cards. I really like this in like the group plug strategy we talked about with the Parnassi list on the channel, where it's pretty much a group hug deck, but everything you're giving them has a drawback. This seems like it's absolutely perfect in there. If you haven't understood by now on this channel, I love old enchantments. They're easily the coolest card type to me. And there's going to be more of them on this list. So for our black slot, we have a little bit of a weird card, I'm not going to lie, but it's pretty good. For the amount of decks and in a Spellslinger deck, I feel like it could do some serious work. Choice of Damnations is 5 and a black for a sorcery, arcane. Target opponent chooses a number. You may have that player lose that much life. If you don't, that player sacrifices all but that many permanents. It's pretty cool. So if your opponent has, let's say, 10 lands, 5 creatures, 2 enchantments, they have 17 things in play total. You go, hey, pick a number. If they pick 5, you can either have them lose 5 life or sack every permanent except for 5. So they might want to up that number a little bit. They'll probably be like, I want to keep 10 of my permanents at least, so I'll do 10. Okay, you lose 10 life for 6 mana, and then I can double it in a Spellslinger deck, potentially lose a lot more than that. I'm going to be putting this in my Tassiger Spellslinger list, which, again, that is coming up very shortly on the channel. They pick a number, you always get the best option. I just like this thing. 6 mana is a little steep, but in a Spellslinger deck, you run a bunch of big spells anyway. There's ways to cheat them out, get them out much cheaper. So in the Tassiger list or something like it, I think this is a great option. Maybe like Kess, where you can use this thing twice. Yeah, that seems pretty good. So for the red option, we've got Bulwark, which is really interesting. It comes in at 3 and 2 red, which may be a little steep, but the effect is pretty good if you're in the right deck. It's an enchantment. During your upkeep, Bulwark deals 1 damage to target opponent for each card in your hand greater than the number of cards in that player's hand. I actually really like this in a wheel deck because you're making everybody have very big hands. You're kind of controlling hand sizes. So if you can make sure that you're getting an extra big hand size compared to everybody else, maybe with the uncommon Planeswalker, I think it's Tameo that makes it so opponents can't draw more than 1 card. You wheel, you have 7 cards, everybody else has 1. Bulwark's dealing 6 damage to opponents. If you're in like a Rakdos discard deck, I also really like this because you can make sure you're keeping all the opponent's hands low, which will make this thing deal more damage. The ping effect kind of lends itself to be in like a group slug list. So if you have like a group slug discard deck, as weird as that sounds, this might be a great option. Definitely something to shout out. For our green slot, I think I've talked about this card before. I can't remember if it was a daily card highlight or in another list. I couldn't come across it or find it, so I'm possibly talking about it again. It's very good. Tranquil Grove is 1 and a green for an enchantment. You can pay 1 and 2 green to destroy all other enchantments. Yeah, it's an enchantment that just can be the only enchantment. You just wipe everything else but Tranquil Grove. Anytime someone plays a problem enchantment, you're just like, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and wipe it with this. This seems very annoying in something like Muldrotha, where it just sits there, stops every enchantment from hitting play. If they even have a way to handle Tranquil Grove itself, you just play it again with Muldrotha. This honestly might be one of the best pieces of enchantment removal I've found, honestly. You might want to just take out most of your enchantment removal, put one of these in there. Okay, so for our artifact slot in this list, it's kind of a multicolor card as well, but I put it in as artifact because we have another cool multicolor card. and it's my video. So we got Blade Coil Serpent, which is X and 6 for an artifact creature serpent. That's a 5/4. When it enters the battlefield, for each 2 blue spent to cast it, draw a card. For each 2 black spent to cast it, each opponent discards a card. And for each 2 red spent to cast it, it gets +1/+0, haste, and trample until end of turn. Yeah, so you can mix and match these. Plus it has X in its mana cost, so you can dump any extra into this as well. You can just pay 6 blue for this thing, and it's a 6 mana 5/4 draw 3 cards, which is pretty good. Or it's a 6 mana 5/4 when it enters, each opponent discards 3 cards. The first 2 are really good. If you're in a Grixis deck, I just think this is pretty decent. You either just get a big card advantage beater, or you get a thing that makes people discard cards. Again, if you're in like a weird wheel discard deck, I think this actually does some work in there as well. If someone doesn't have any blockers, you could use the red part of this just to bash face. And at the end of the day, it costs 6, and it also is in the color of blue and black. You have access to stuff like High Tide, you have access to stuff like Cryptghast, so it's not unthinkable to play this thing for 8, 10, 12 mana and have a ton of value when it hits play. I don't think this is a very high power card. I don't think it's low power either. I definitely think this is in like the mid, slightly above mid power tier. So if you're in that kind of range, I think this card's very, very good. The reason I think it's so underplayed is because it has to go into a deck that contains Grixis colors. So in Commander, your Commander has to have those colors. And dumping multiples of 1 color into a thing when you're in a 3-color plus deck is a little difficult. I do think there's ways that you could build the deck for this to be very powerful, as I said, with the High Tides and the Cryptghast. But I'm not sure. Let me know if you run this one. I actually am curious to see how this one is played for some of you guys. But moving into the multicolor card of the list, we've got Purgatory. Purgatory is 2, a white and a black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control dies, put that card face up under Purgatory. During your upkeep, you may pay 4 colorless and 2 life to put any card under Purgatory into play as though it were just played. If Purgatory leaves, remove all cards under it from the game. This is cool. There's a few cards that are printed that do something similar to this, but they almost always are like when there's no creatures in play, all the creatures you exiled come back in. This one's unique in that you just get an option on your upkeep to pay 4 and 2 life and just play one of those things. This is interesting though. I don't know how good this is in like a Reanimator style deck, like let's say Teneb, because when Purgatory leaves, it removes all the cards. And when something dies, you have to put that card under Purgatory. So it's a huge chance that someone just removes Purgatory and you lose all the access to those creatures. But if you're in a deck, I almost feel like this really, really excels in like a mid-range, late-game kind of battle cruiser deck that doesn't have that many reanimation sub-themes, but instead relies on like big mid-game to late-game creatures. This seems like a great way to just play this around all these big threats you have and be like, hey, you can either get rid of the Purgatory. Even if you do get rid of it and I lose all those creatures, I really don't run any reanimation anyway. I run Purgatory just so I can keep getting back all these big threats in my deck. This one's throwing me for a loop because it reads very much like it should be a Reanimator card. I don't think it is, as I said. I think it's better in a creature-based mid to late game deck. And as weird as it sounds, even something like those big 5-color dragon decks like Tiamat or like the Dragon, I think this isn't that bad in there either because you're not going to run a lot of recursion in those decks, and just having Purgatory in play just in case any of your big dragons die and then paying 4 mana, 2 life to get back your big dragons, that also doesn't seem like something to scoff at. That also seems really strong. Hello, this is Nick from the future. I just wanted to point out that with Purgatory, you could let your commander go under it, and even if they do get rid of Purgatory, no skin off our bones, we can just move the commander back into command zone in response to it getting moved to exile off of Purgatory. So essentially, Purgatory is a way to just consistently play your commander for 4 colorless and 2 life. So I know I said it'd be really good in a deck with a lot of big creatures, but it's also really good in a deck where you just want to keep the commander around and maybe the commander cost a lot. But anyway, back to current Nick. He thinks we're done and we're out of here. So if you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff. Join the Discord down below. If you want to show some additional support to the channel, head over to Patreon. It starts as low as $1. Seriously helps me out a ton. Make sure to keep an eye on the channel because on the 1st, we're going to have something really exciting dropping. So make sure you're on the Discord, make sure you're subscribed, all that good stuff. And with that, guys, I'll see you in the next video.
I just needed a place to stay in peace.